Karl Marx. I was born in 1818 and died in 1883. I am here to introduce you to the conflict sociology that has grown from my work. I was a philosopher and sociologist. I worked to expose the history of class struggles and the mechanisms by which society progresses because of the conflict among competing economic groups. I am most well known for my co-authored piece, The Communist Manifesto. In most of my work, economics dominates. How does the economic system of capitalism shape society? How does the pursuit of profit and private property shape our society? We can think about the history of societies as the history of class conflicts. Every capitalist society can be characterized by a system of relationships among different economic classes. This includes four main classes: capitalists, the working class, managers or small business owners, and those unnecessary to the capitalist system. The conflict perspective, which grew from my work, shows how society is organized through a process of conflict, where people are driven by economic interests. The conflict perspective that grew from my work suggests social change occurs through the conflict between competing economic classes. Many social thinkers before me have been respectable. They appeal to the established order. They talk of ideals and avoid looking too closely at unpleasant facts about the new industrial order. But the 19th century was not simply a glorious era of science, progress, justice, and brotherhood. St. Simon's harmonious hierarchy of industrial men or Comte's social organism made sense only if one closed one's eyes to what was going on in the mundane world. Black smoke was beginning to hang in the air over the industrial towns of England, France, and Germany, and on the streets behind the houses of the prospering businessmen were growing the tenements, where workers crowded with their families in scenes of grime, poverty, and disease. The mines and factories were manned by a tubercular population of men, women, and children. Work 14-hour days, 6 or 7 days a week, without respite except through lay-off or death. For me, the basis of reality was here, in the harsh facts of material and economic conditions, and the talk of philosophers, politicians, and priests was only a smokescreen designed to divert attention from it. I was the great angry man of the 19th century, indignant at what was happening to people, and at the hypocrisy and blindness of those who covered it up. I set out to reveal what was going on, to explain both the inexorable workings of the economic substructure and the deceptions of the political and ideological superstructure. I was the first to come to grips with the realities of social conflict instead of wishing them away, and for this I doomed myself to a life in the underground. But this was the fate he wished. Free from the illusions of respectability, I thought I saw the system bringing its own destruction, and the outlines of a newer, better world arising in its mid. I've been living in England lately, and I had a great flight, but as soon as I hit the States, things started to get weird. I'm at a layover in Hoboken, New Jersey, on my way to visit my sociologist friend Timothy Kubel in Fresno, California. So I'm at the airport in Hoboken, and I walked into a public bathroom and noticed a guy with no arms standing next to a urinal. As I take care of my business, I wonder how the poor soul is going to relieve himself. I finish and head for the door, but then I figure I should ask the man if he needs help. "Oh yes, please," the man cries. "You have a kind heart, sir," says the man with no arms. But as I go ahead, unzip the man, and pull his willy out, I encounter all kinds of mold, red bumps, moles, scabs, scars, and other unpleasant-looking things. The armless man asks me to kindly point it, then shake it, put it back and zip it. So I gather my courage, shut my eyes, and follow the poor man's instructions. "Thank you very much, sir," says the armless man. "No problem," I say, "but what the hell is wrong with your penis?" I ask. The guy pulls his arms out of his shirt and says, "I don't know, but I ain't touching it." Karl Marx, the man of conflict, was both a realist and a revolutionist. It is not surprising that I was the most controversial of all modern thinkers, with the possible exception of Sigmund Freud. My writings have been the handbook of revolutionists, and would-be revolutionists. With the success of my followers in Russia, China, and elsewhere, my ideas have been raised to the level of state dogma. In Moscow, the Institute of Marxism-Leninism faithfully recorded the events that took place every day of my life. Marxism became a political orthodoxy. On the other side, virtually all opponents of communism have felt they must refute the Marxist system, usually by pointing out that revolution has occurred only in backward countries, where I did not expect it, and has not occurred in mature capitalistic nations, where I did expect it. The anti-communist revolutions in Eastern Europe and Russia during 1989-1991 further discredited Marxism as a political and economic program. Can we say, then, that Marxism is just a bizarre episode that the future will increasingly forget? I predicted that factory workers would be the gravediggers of the capitalist system. Instead, the worldwide capitalism of the late 20th century appears to be burying socialism. But let us make some distinctions among the various parts of my ideas. My program of socialism did not work out as I expected. But I did not say much about socialism, only regarding this as a phase in the future that should be created when the time came. My work concentrated on capitalism and its internal conflicts. Ironically, the collapse of socialism makes the topic of capitalism even more central. This is the system we see almost everywhere, including in the old Soviet bloc countries, where capitalism is being introduced today. Socialism is certainly not a utopian end of history, but neither is capitalism. Capitalism is full of economic conflicts, and these inner workings of capitalism are even more on the center of the stage now that the conflict with socialism has virtually disappeared. My great contribution to sociology was in opening up the analysis of economic classes and economic conflict, and in proposing that they have a central place in the theory of how societies operate. Though Marxism was wrong about many things, the central insight remains an important one. Knowledge advances by using and revising ideas to account for the facts we turn up, building on strengths, shoring up weaknesses. In the long run, we are best served by discovering as much as we can of the truth, not by rushing to act on half-truths or outright illusions. My ideas can best be used if we are aware of both their weaknesses and their strengths, and that is what this talk will try to display. So I was telling you about my weird experience in the Hoboken bathroom. That wasn't the only thing. When I got on the plane, another weird thing happened to me. I was in this huge plane, and this couple sitting next to me had this conversation that I just didn't understand. Maybe you can help me get it. So we're in this 3-seat aisle, and the man is sitting next to window, and next to him is the woman, and I'm sitting next to the woman on the aisle. The man and the woman don't appear to know each other. Suddenly, the man sneezes. He unzips his pants and wipes himself off with his handkerchief. He zips up and continues reading his magazine. The woman cannot believe what she has just seen. He sneezes again, unzips and wipes himself off with the handkerchief. The woman says, "Sir, that's disgusting and rude. If you do it again, I'm going to call the flight attendant and have you removed from this plane." He says, "I'm so sorry that I've offended you. I have this very rare embarrassing condition that causes me to orgasm every time I sneeze." The woman, disarmed by the man's honesty, says with sympathy, "Oh, you poor man. What do you take for it?" "Pepper," he answers. "I was born in Trier, one of the small legalistic states of the Rhineland, on the border between a progressive France and the more traditional parts of Germany. My father was a liberal, a Jew from a long line of rabbis who had nominally converted to Christianity in order to maintain his career as a lawyer, that is, as a member of the local government bureaucracy, since lawyers were not independent professionals in Germany. Young Marx attended the University of Berlin, where he drank in taverns, acquired debts, fought the usual duel, and got the usual scar on his face, and studied philosophy. In short, I prepared myself for an academic career. But circumstances conspired to forbid me a respectable career as a brilliant professor. I became caught up in the intellectual movement known as the Young Hegelians. Georg Hegel, 1770–1832, had been the dominant German philosopher of his day. He was a liberal after the German fashion, which meant that he believed in the rule of laws, rather than the arbitrary rule of humankind, and hence supported the Prussian state. Hegel's philosophy was the culmination of the idealist tradition that began with Kant. It held that the essence of reality is reason, but that the spirit of reason manifests itself only gradually, revealing more and more facets of itself during the course of time. History, he held, is the growth of reason to consciousness of itself, and the constitutional legalistic state is the culmination of history. Hegel developed his philosophy, while Napoleon seemed to be spreading the achievements of the French Revolution all over Europe. Later, in the reaction following Napoleon's final defeat in 1815, Hegel found it expedient to declare that history culminated in the bureaucratic Prussian state, and he became the official philosopher at Berlin. Of course, there was no reason history should come to a halt in Prussia, especially when that state still lacked a true constitution, and after Hegel's death the revolutionary implications of his doctrine came to the fore again. One faction of Hegel's students, the liturgians, unleashed historical relativism as an attack on the autocratic state and its ideological bulwark, the state church. My teacher, Bruno Bohr, investigated the Bible as a historical document and declared the Gospels to be forgeries and Jesus a historical myth. For this, Bohr was dismissed from his university post in 1842 as dangerous to the state. This ended my chances for an academic career, since sponsorship was even more important in the universities of the time than it is now. It had been predicted that I would be the most eminent professor of my generation, but this path was now closed. I took my first step toward the underground. I became the editor of a liberal newspaper in Cologne, a westernized city on the Rhine River. Hard economic realities struck me immediately. I became embroiled in a controversy with the authorities over their decision to prohibit peasants from cutting firewood in the forest. Although this was a traditional custom, the trees were protected by laws. I wrote acidly, while poor people froze. I began to view philosophy of all sorts as a distraction from the hard, material realities. Hegel's idealism stood history on its head. I later wrote. The task was to set it on its feet. The newspaper lasted 5 months before being suppressed by the government. The conservative papers accused me of being a communist. I did not quite know what this meant, but I resolved to find out. Now 24 years old, I went to Paris, the intellectual home of all radicals. I read the French historians, imbued with the Saint-Simonian idea of progress and the image of industrial society breaking out of the bonds of feudalism, and I encountered the advocates of utopian socialist communities. To my German Hegelianism and French radicalism I added the third leg of my system, the ideas of the British economists Adam Smith, Thomas Malthus, and David Ricardo. These thinkers explained how the movements of people and goods in this new era were controlled by the invisible hand of the market. Among my radical acquaintances was Friedrich Engels, another idealistic young German, who had just returned from my father's textile factory in Manchester, bringing with me a harsh expose titled The Condition of the Working Class in England in 1844. Their ideas meshed, and they launched an intellectual partnership that was to last the rest of their lives. They were soon expelled from France for their radical writings. They went to Belgium, and then to England. In 1847 they attended secret meetings in London of a new revolutionary coalition of labour unions at that time illegal called the Communist League. As its platform they wrote a manifesto which ended with the following words: the Communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries, unite. And so I had a pretty weird trip over here. I picked up a paper when I got to Fresno. The amazing Fresno Bee. I mean this is amazing. The international section is about 2 pages long, about of the length of the coupon section. Is this a city newspaper or a flyer for a flea market? Anyway, there were a few stories in there that surprised me. One on the new war on poverty, one on casinos as a cure for economic crises, and another on trickle-down economics as a cure for crises in capitalism. So the bourgeois corporate elite decided he was going to turn over a new leaf for his New Year's resolution. He decided to wage a war on poverty. So had thought about it, and planned it all out like a good war. And he decided he would go big and attack strong, right at the beginning of his war. So, you know what he did? He bombed the soup kitchen. All right, another big story in the Fresno Bee is on the use of casinos to get rich. Apparently Kansas needs money, so they're going to open these casinos, and then that tax revenue, well, brother, that's just like planting a big, old, fat money seed, and then a money tree will grow. And then we'll just shake the money leaves out of the money tree because, obviously, this tax revenue is only coming from people that can afford it. I mean, my God, poor people would never gamble. They're great with money. That's why they're poor. And the third story I read was on another supposed expert grasping at a solution to our current economic crisis. His answer: trickle-down economics. It's been done. It didn't work. The whole idea was supply-side economics. Give rich people a lot of money. They'll spend it. It'll go into the economy. Here's what we found out. You know what? Rich people, they are really good at keeping the money they have. That's how they got rich. Duh. If you want it in the economy, give it to the poor people. You know what they're really good at? Spending all their money. The Communist Manifesto was finished in January 1848. In February, during an economic crisis in Paris, a group of demonstrating unemployed workers were fired upon by soldiers, and the city erupted into riot. The French king abdicated, his government collapsed, and a wave of revolt was set off through the cities of Germany, Italy, Austria, and most of the rest of Europe. The nobility everywhere were frightened and on the defensive. In France, the wealthy property owners took command of the Second Republic. A popular left-wing revolt in June was crushed by the army in 6 days of bloody fighting. Around Europe, the right wing gradually regained confidence and began to re-establish its power. I had edited the revolutionary newspaper in Cologne during the uprising there, and was banished by the Prussian government. Reaction had set in again. I went to London, my final place of refuge, and, watched by police spies, began again to write. With me came my wife, my childhood sweetheart, and the daughter of a German aristocrat who had been our neighbor in Trier. Life became a struggle to survive. For a while I made a living as a foreign correspondent for the New York Tribune, then under a liberal editor. At times the family nearly starved. They lived in the poorest working-class section of London. They pawned their possessions and borrowed money from Engels, who was then working in his father's business in Manchester. Several of my children died of malnutrition and disease. Through it all I managed to work, sitting in the reading room of the British Museum from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day for years. At last, in 1867, my researches were published as Das Kapital, a book that would help bring down half the world. My life work forms a comprehensive system, but for purposes of analysis it may be divided into 3 parts. My sociology, built around the analysis of class consciousness and class conflict. My economics, which develops the internal contradictions of capitalism. And my social and political philosophy, built around the notion of alienation and its solution in communism. These parts are not equally valid. My sociology has turned out to be basically correct, and has been very important for subsequent theories. My economics, on the other hand, is crucially flawed, although it points us to some important questions. My philosophy, in the final analysis, is based on value premises and ways of looking at the world that individuals can accept or reject as a source of inspiration as they see fit.